Hey everyone, so 3.4 just got released and that means a few key updates for the Genius Invocation TCG. First of all, a few cards got nerfed, a few characters got nerfed, most notably Yoimiya's burst now costs 1 more energy, and Kolei's specialization card, Sidewinder, now costs 1 more elemental die to play. So lots of people are freaking out, they're saying, oh no, is Quicken bad now, is it not playable anymore, is Ayamiya bad now? I don't necessarily think so, I don't agree with that. I still feel like the decks, they are still pretty viable, they're still powerful in their own rights. And it is a good thing for the meta because it means that, more cards are balanced now, and it also means that we get to see a wider variety of decks and strategies. And speaking of wider variety of decks and strategies, we also have two new characters in the TCG. Firstly, we have Beidou. Beidou is a pretty interesting defensive electro character. It is very useful to know how to play Beidou and how to start with her in your different games. The other character that we have as well is Klee. Klee is an interesting character that I haven't cracked yet. She is basically the pyro version of maybe Mona, in the sense whereby she is able to deal a lot of pyro damage very consistently. I've seen lots of builds around her using both herself and Ellen, and basically what you do is that you just spam a lot of pyro attacks through the two cards. And that is interesting, but that is not the style of the show today. Our focus today is actually the Pirate Queen herself, Beidou, and I think the aim of the deck is really trying to look at Ayamiya, look at what they did well, and raise them one electro character, right? Because the deck today that we're going to review is actually an Ayaka and Beidou deck. I don't have a name as elegant as Ayamiya yet. Maybe, I don't know, Ayado or something, I don't know, it doesn't sound as cool, but yeah, I think Beidou is a pretty cool character, and yeah, let's get into the deck tag and let's look at what Beidou does as a character card. So starting off with Beidou, I absolutely love her animated card. You can see that I don't even know what it's called in the lore, but yeah, it's just nice to see like electro serpents flying around her, especially when you use her and use her burst. She looks even cooler. But anyway, what does Beidou do? Essentially, Beidou's normal attack is nothing surprising. It is just a normal attack that uses 2 physical damage. Her next attack, which is her elemental skill, is something that is slightly more interesting. It is called Tight Collar. It costs a total of 3 elemental die to play. Essentially, when you play Tight Collar, it says your character gains a Tight Collar Surface Embrace and prepares skill Wave Strider. So Genshin is very good at creating lots of tags. Essentially, all of their different descriptions, they're kind of like graphic novels. But short answer is, what does this do? Short answer is, basically when you play this, Beidou passes the turn to your opponent, and then she also creates 2 shields for herself. Essentially, if you recall how Beidou works as a character in the game, this is exactly how she works as a card as well. She creates 2 shields, right? She passes the turn to your opponent. When your opponent does whatever they do, they pass it back to you. All you do as Beidou is that you will use Wave Strider, which is dealing 2 electro damage. So to summarize, when you use this skill, you defend yourself, you end the turn, and then when it's back to your turn, you don't get to do anything. You don't get to play any supports, you don't get to play any food. Essentially, you straight up just deal 2 electro damage, and then you pass the turn back to your opponent. So, some people might think that this is a very bad skill, myself included when I first saw this, because essentially you're telegraphing to your opponent and saying, hey, this is what I'm gonna do. I'm just going to defend, and I am not going to do anything else, and during my turn, I'm just going to deal damage. I can't eat food, I can't buff anything. I'm just going to do 2 damage to you flat. Some people might think that this is bad because it telegraphs your information, and it's especially bad if your opponent has some sort of a control character on their side. For example, if they have Jean, if they have Sucrose, essentially what they can do is that you play Beidou's skill, you defend, they use Jean or Sucrose to swap you to another character, and then you basically don't do any damage at all. So you just defend for 2 and you don't do anything. Well, I guess the only thing that you do here is to create more energy for Beidou, and then brings you 1 step closer to a burst. But yeah, essentially for this particular skill, know when to play it. Don't be too greedy with it. Later on in this video, I will talk about one of my gameplay videos where I played against this person that taught me a defensive masterclass with Beidou throughout the game. So yeah, let's talk about this skill later on. Basically, my take on this skill is that It is a good skill. It's not really a problem telegraphing to your opponent what you're going to do next, but play this wisely, play this smartly, don't be greedy. Maybe sometimes it's better to play the normal attack after all, right? Next up, we have Stormbreaker, which is what makes Beidou so special and is basically an electro version of what Yoimiya does. So it says it is very costly. It costs 4 dice, costs 3 energy. What it does is that you deal 3 electro damage and then you create 1 Thunder Beast charge. Essentially, you know, ignoring the names, ignoring the nomenclature, the verbiage, essentially what it just means is that you do what Yoimiya does, and basically for the next 2 rounds, whenever your characters use a normal attack, you will deal 1 electro damage. So the key difference here between Beidou's burst and Yoimiya's burst is that for Yoimiya, you essentially just need to go to another character and use any skill. It can be a normal attack, it can be a elemental skill, etc, etc. But for Beidou, you must use a normal attack. And this difference is super important, and this will also be why I chose this particular Ayaka, Chongyun, and Beidou team, right? So remember, you have to use a normal attack, right? And then you do 1 electro damage. The other effect is pretty good as well. It's essentially the skill, or rather the shield, that says when your character receives at least 3 damage, it decreases the damage taken by 1. So I would probably think that is closer to a Yoimiya skill in terms of the number of rounds that they last for, in terms of the way they can trigger additional elemental reactions. But you know, you are trading 1 less electro damage for 1 more shield as compared to what Yoimiya does. So that is the key difference for Beidou. So I think in summary, Beidou is a very interesting character because she is super defensive. I would show you in a gameplay video just a bit to show you how you can use Beidou as your first character to soak out a ton of damage while dealing damage back to your opponent, and also while charging up your energy. So that's the first one. She is a defensive tank. The next thing that I like about Beidou is that she enables elemental reactions, and this is super important because you can easily enable things like Superconduct, dealing piercing damage across your opponent's entire team. You can easily trigger things like Overload, Electro Charge, or even Quicken, right? So her elemental burst is just very flexible in general. And the final reason why I like Beidou as a character is because she is a Claymore user, and if you see my previous videos, Wolf's Gravestone is very busted. Essentially, if your opponent has 6 HP or less, this Wolf's Gravestone adds 3 damage to your attacks. So Beidou's very crappy 2 damage normal attack becomes a 5 damage attack, right? So this is the reason why I really like Beidou. Cool defensive skill, flexible elemental burst, access to Wolf's Gravestone. So that is why Beidou is a character that is pretty unique to me. So before we go into the character choices and the team choices, right, I think it's probably quite useful to give a preview of what this team does. The hint is always Wolf's Gravestone. Wolf's Gravestone is so good. But essentially, with this team here, it is a Superconduct team that aims to snipe your opponent and deal a lot of piercing damage. So with Beidou, with Chongyun, and with Ayaka, you want to trigger Superconduct as many times as possible so that you can bring your opponent's team down to 6 HP. And that is super important because the moment you reach 6 HP and you attach Wolf's Gravestone to either Beidou or Chongyun, you'll be able to do a whole ton of damage and you can easily knock out your opponent. So to summarize, the purpose of this particular deck is to use Beidou, Chongyun, and Ayaka to deal electro, or rather Superconduct damage, right? Do piercing damage to bring all of your opponent down to about 6 HP. So to do that, you'll want to either start with Beidou or Chongyun, start chipping down your opponents, start charging out for Beidou's burst, start dealing Superconduct damage. Use Ayaka as the mid-game attacker to continue chipping your opponent's damage down, and then leave Chongyun and Beidou alive so that you can draw for your Wolf's Gravestone and use either of them to sweep your opponent for game. So that is essentially the game plan for this particular deck. Alright, so next up, let's talk about why we chose this particular team. Is this just me being lazy, building an Ayamiya deck and then replacing it with Beidou? Or is this actually a team that is fun to play, good in the meta, and a good use of Beidou in general? I don't know, you decide, because I made this deck and I think it's good, I think it's fun. But yeah, let me just explain my reasons for choosing this particular deck. So, to use Beidou's Elemental's burst efficiently, right, your character needs to use a normal attack for you to trigger the additional electro damage. The additional electro damage is nice, but it doesn't really mean anything unless I'm able to trigger an elemental reaction. And therefore, I would need characters that can consistently do electro or elemental reactions with this electro damage. So the first two characters that come to mind would be Chongyun and Ayaka. I know there are lots of other good characters out there right now, like for example, you can easily use Klee and that will become an overload attack. You can easily use Mona, that becomes supercharged or electrocharged attack. But I really like my choice here in Chongyun and Ayaka. If you don't already know, Chongyun is a really powerful card because what he does is that he can deal 2 physical damage with his normal attack, but that's not the secret sauce. The secret sauce here is actually using his elemental skill, which creates the Chonghua Frost Field. What the Frost Field does is that for the next 2 rounds, it basically converts all of your characters' sword, claymore, and polearm attacks from physical damage to cryo damage. So what you want to do here is essentially play Chongyun's elemental skill, right? And then what you want to do is to convert his physical damage into cryo damage. And then you can also use, if Beidou's burst is online, essentially it will do 2 cryo damage plus 1 electro damage, that's 3 damage, plus an additional 1 damage for Superconduct, so it's a total of 4 damage, and also deals 1 piercing to the rest of your opponent's team. So this is pretty powerful because it helps you to snipe and chip down your opponent's characters. Why do you want to chip down your opponent's characters even if they're on standby? I'll come to it, but the hint is Wolf's Gravestone, right? So essentially with Chongyun, you'll be able to use Beidou's burst effect very efficiently. The final reason why I really like Chongyun in this deck is because of his powerful elemental burst. This elemental burst deals a whopping 7 damage. It's kind of like Deluxe burst that deals 8 damage, but 7 cryo damage is very powerful. And within this deck, there is a way to set up Chongyun or Beidou such that you can use their burst immediately at the start of turn 2. So essentially, if you use Chongyun, right, you attack twice and then you charge up his burst. It means that your opponent's active character should have 5 HP left. If they don't swap their character to another hero, and if you use your elemental burst at the start of turn 2, that character basically dies, right? So this is super powerful, and this is one reason why I really like Chongyun as a support, or rather an alternative DPS character. Next up, let's talk Ayaka. Why do we want Ayaka in the team? So the main reason why we want Ayaka in the team, or rather the 2 reasons why we want Ayaka in the team, is because her normal attack, if you swap into Ayaka, her passive turns her normal attack into a cryo damage attack. And that is useful for us because it means that we can use her in conjunction with Beidou's shield attack, or rather Beidou's burst attack. So with that, it means that you also deal 2 cryo damage plus 1 electro damage plus 1 superconduct damage. So for a total of 4 damage plus whatever piercing you're dealing to your opponents. So Ayaka is really good in her own sense because she is able to trigger Beidou's burst effect very efficiently. The other reason why we use Ayaka is mainly because she is a sword user, which means that Chongyun's Chonghua Frost Field will be able to infuse her attacks into cryo attacks, even if you didn't swap her into the active character spot within that turn. So for example, if you swap into Ayaka and then you have to end the turn, the next turn, if she is still active, essentially the Chonghua View will turn her physical damage into crowd damage. And this is super important because I tried to draft a team of Beidou, Chongyun, and Ganyu, and when I was playing Ganyu, I was realizing that, hey, hang on, I wanted Ganyu to, deal a lot of piercing damage through the use of a burst and through the use of her 5 dice attack. But what I realized is that I can't actually change her physical damage into cryo damage because Chonghua Frost View is only affecting physical, or rather, is only affecting swords, claymores, and polearms. So therefore, I went for the next best option, who is Ayaka. So yeah, Ayaka is just a really good mid-game chip damage character in general. I wouldn't call her a character that can close out my games for me. In fact, what I want to do is that I want to set up, I want to use Chongyun to chip my opponents down, do some damage. I want to set up Beidou to use her burst immediately. After using her burst, I actually want to go into Ayaka immediately and start dealing Superconduct damage with her. And I guess the reason for that is because if you look at her normal attack, her elemental skill, her elemental burst in itself, they don't really deal a ton of damage, right? They just do 2, 3, 4 damage. I know the Frost Flag does 2 damage to the opponent's active character, but in the current meta, that is not enough, right? In the current meta, the amount of damage that you deal, 2, 3, 4 here, it is not enough to take the team out. Right now, people like to play lots of recovery, lots of Lotus to soak up damage. They like to play lots of Shield. They like to play the Geo Lawatro. They like tanky stuff. And if Ayaka is there as your mid-game finisher, you are basically dead. So Ayaka's role is very unique in this deck. It's not like the Ayamiya deck whereby, you set up your Miya and Ayaka is your endgame. For this particular game, you set up Ayaka by playing Beidou's Burst. But what you want to do with her is to just do chip damage, start to pierce your opponents so that they can finally go down to 6 HP. And then that's when we get to the secret sauce. Or I know I called Chonghua View the secret sauce already, but the true secret sauce in this deck is Wolf Gravestone. That's probably the 3rd time I've said it now. So yeah, let's get into the actual deck in itself and the kind of cards that we're playing. And also let's talk about our starting hand, what the ideal turn 1 looks like, how to defend with Beidou, and what are the other cards that we play in order to supplement this particular team and this team's strategy. So what does the ideal opening hand look like? Before I can answer that question, I need to know what my endgame is. And my endgame here is essentially Wolf's Gravestone sweeping, right? Because Wolf's Gravestone is great because you can either equip it to Beidou, you can either equip it to Chongyun, but what I want to mention here is that you don't want either of them to die. Do not sacrifice Beidou just to play her burst. Do not sacrifice Chongyun just to play his burst. You have to rotate this team in quite a smart manner, such that both of them survive, right? So that towards the end of the game, you can use either one of them to take damage and take the fall for the other one. You can use one to soak damage, and you can use the other one to do, you can while one of them dies, you can buy time to set up Wolf's Gravestone for a final game sweep. So what this means is that at the start of the turn, you definitely do not want Wolf's Gravestone. You don't want to see it in your first opening hand. You might see some gameplay videos later that show that I tried to keep Wolf's Gravestone in my hand, but after playing this for a while, that is not the right play. Keep Wolf's Gravestone towards the end. So what does ideal turn 1 look like, and what are the cards that you really want? So cards that I want is actually Iron Tang Tian. This is not a card that I'd really use too much in my decks because I don't really see the need to ramp them up too quickly. But as you can see here, this particular deck it consists of 3 energy hungry heroes, right? All of them need 3 energy to have their bursts come online. But what that means is that, I really like Iron Tang Tian in my opening hand because what you could do is that you can either start with Chongyun or you can start with Beidou. You can attack twice, once with elemental skill, once with normal attack, and then you just play Iron Tang Tian, you pass, and then essentially you can play your burst first thing next turn. So I really like having Iron Tang Tian in my opening hand more so than used to, because in this particular deck you don't actually swap as often as you do for the quicken decks, and therefore Liu Su is still good. It is possible for someone to convince me to take Liu Su out of this particular deck, but yeah, Iron Tangtian is just way better for this particular deck, just because we don't really swap. Another card that I really like to start with would be the Parametric Transformer, because right now in the meta, most people like to use cards like Kea, Xingqiu, Klee, Mona, of which the common theme that they have there is they like to deal elemental damage to you. And therefore, playing Parametric is super important, or rather super powerful, because with Parametric, you can even play this turn 1, right? I attack with Chongyun twice, and then my opponent takes the bait and attacks me with 1 electro, or rather 1 elemental damage, and I get 3 more dice to allow Chongyun to attack once more, and then therefore set up his burst even without Iron Tangtian. So the sequence that I'm thinking of here, just to repeat that, is that I start with Chongyun, I play his elemental skill, and then I play his normal attack that is now changed into an elemental attack. Right, so that's 2 hits for the Parametric, and I just need my opponent to hit me 1 more time in order to gain 3 basic elemental dice, and then I can probably, hope that I get another Cairo dice, or I can even just sacrifice 1 card to get 1 more Cairo, and then let Chongyun attack the 3rd time, and therefore his burst will be set up. So I like to start with Parametric as well. Another card that I really like to start with would be Chang the 9th, because Chang the 9th, right, is pretty good for this particular deck. It costs 0, and if you do piercing damage, which you want to do as Superconduct, or if you do physical damage, which you can do as Chongyun or Beidou, or even Ayaka sometimes, but more so for Chongyun and Beidou, you can easily deal all of this physical damage, right? So one thing that I like to do is that I like to play Chang the 9th and like to play Parametric at the same time, because sometimes when your opponent see the Parametric, they'll say, oh, I don't want to trigger this, I want that, and therefore want to use normal attack on my opponent. But if you play Chang the 9th, it puts your opponent in a bind, right? Because even if they use the physical damage against you so that they can get around Parametric, they still trigger your Chang the 9th anyway, so either way they lose and either way you get value. So the 3 key cards, I wouldn't say the rest, I don't really love them as a starting hand. So yeah, 3 key cards I would start with, I would roll for, would be Chang the 9th, Iron Tangtian, and Parametric Transformer. Alright, so now we have discussed what the ideal starting hand is. I think it's probably worth discussing what the ideal turn 1 is as well. So with my tinfoil hat and my very, very dumb theories and my habits, because I am a creature of habits, I thought, hey, why don't I just start with Chongyun, because starting with Chongyun always ends well, right? But in this particular gameplay video, which I will also show later on in this particular video, I would just want to show you why it is worth starting with Beidou sometimes. So in summary, what I'm trying to propose here is that if you are going first, it might be good to start with Beidou. If you're not going first, it might be good for you to go into Chongyun and do big damage and just kill off one of your opponent's characters. And in this video, you will see why it is important to start with Beidou if you're going first, and what a defensive masterclass looks like from my opponent's POV, because my opponent played super well here. So essentially, my opponents were starting first. So my opponent went for the Beidou, I went for the Chongyun, and then I stupidly think that, hey, I want to match your Beidou play as well, and therefore I swap over to Beidou. So here what my opponent does is that they just go for the elemental skill, if I'm not wrong. Yep, they just went for a tight collar, they don't do anything. And I was thinking like, oh yeah, I'm so smart, I'm a genius here, I'm just gonna play Parametric. Or am I even gonna play Parametric? I don't know. But essentially, I play Parametric, and then I go over to Beidou for some reason, because I thought I was very smart. I know why. So I swapped over to Beidou because I thought tight collar. So this is worth pausing here. I thought tight collar was gonna deal 2 damage to me, right? And therefore, I'm going to get 1 trigger activated on Parametric. But what you find out here is that it does not trigger, right? The card essentially says when a card uses a skill, when they use a skill, if the elemental damage was dealt, this would gain 1 counter. But technically, tight collar was not the skill used to damage me. It is actually the second one. I can't remember what it's called, but essentially you gain something, right? So it's the second effect that deals damage to me and not Tight Collar. And therefore, I did not get a counter on this because my opponent did not deal damage when they use a skill. So that was mistake number one, probably worth sharing here. But I say that this is a defensive masterclass because I tried to match what they do. I went for the Tight Collar as well. And then my opponent just goes for the Tight Collar anyway. They call my bluff. They went for the Tight Collar. I deal 0 damage and my opponent does 2 more damage to me. So this was just when I realized that, hey, yeah, I messed up here. Because by the end of our first round's exchange, their Beidou is at 2 energy, 10 HP. My Beidou is at 1 energy, 6 HP. And we both know which Beidou is doing better. It is not me. So, what I'm trying to say here is that if you start first, right, go with Beidou, play defensively, play smartly, and get your energy up so that you can play burst as soon as possible. If you go second, go with Chongyun, just try to damage Beidou as much as possible or your opponent as much as possible, set up the burst, go for the burst, and kill off your opponent's character. So yeah, that is my proposal on what your ideal turn 1 should be. So now that we've spoken about what your ideal turn 1 should be, let's get into the actual deck tag and what is in the deck. I know I've already shown all of you what the cards are, but let's get into them. So in equipment slot, we only have Wolf's Gravestone. That is the only one that you ever need in this deck. Some people might ask me, why do I not have Gambler's Earrings? Gambler's Earrings looks like there is an auto include here. But you know what, I did experiment with it, and my conclusion is that this is a deck that doesn't really knock characters out very often. It's a patient build-up deck that deals Superconduct damage that makes things, or rather characters, easier to kill, but it doesn't mean that you kill them quickly or you kill them too often. And therefore, you know, even when I played Gambler's Earrings, I didn't really view any value from it, so I've taken Gambler's Earrings out. So that is basically our weapon slot. Next up, we have our dice cheating, fixing, farming package. It is a combination of Knights of Avernus Library, Liban, we have the Parametric, and we have the Pyro dice. So that is basically our dice fixing, cheating, and farming package. So I like to play Avernus Library in this deck because characters like Beidou, she is very dice hungry. Even if I play Jade Chamber, I don't know if I will have enough Electro dice for her to play her burst. On top of that, with this deck, I like to be flexible. I don't want to just play Jade Chamber so that I can guarantee Electro dice. I want to also guarantee my rolls into Pyro dice. The reason for that is because the moment I play Beidou's burst, chances are I am probably going to swap into Chongyun on Ayaka anyway, probably Ayaka, so that I can trigger the normal attack wombo combo through the use of Ayaka's Pyro infused normal attack and Beidou's additional electro damage. So I like playing Avernus Library just so that I can roll for dice that can fit both of my elements in the team. Secondly, we've got Liban. Liban needs no explanation, he needs no introduction, he's just everywhere in every deck. But yeah, I think he's a good include in this deck because he costs 0 and this particular team is very dice hungry. So play Liban, he is good for a tempo swing, especially when you can end your turn first and get more dice, get more cards, and you big damage across many turns against your opponents. Another reason why I really like Liban as well is because he is able to create 2 Omni dice for you, which is super important for the late game because I've raved about Wolf's Gravestone over and over again, but do remember that it costs 3 dice and it costs 3 of the same elemental dice. So if you have Liban, if Liban gives you 2 Omni elements, essentially you can just take any other dice from any other element to include, or rather to just equip your Wolf's Gravestone as easily as possible. So yeah, Liban is good as an all-round character, and especially because he enables your endgame plays. Parametric Transformer, I've spoken about why it is good in my starting hand guide. So yeah, it is good because it allows you to attack probably a 3rd time in the same turn and set up your burst in time for the start of round 2. And then Paradise is Paradise. Do not sleep on it. It is just good in general, and no one's sleeping on it. If you're playing a double elemental team, there's no way you're sleeping on the elemental die. So yeah, it is an auto include. Next up, we have the energy package. So with energy package, I've already spoken about some of the different cards here. We've got Iron Tian. Really good for this deck. I just realized that, you know, after testing this with this particular deck, it is a lot better than other cards like Liu Su or even Star Signs, right? Because with this, you pay 2 unaligned dice, and essentially you can use it for across 2 different rounds. So it has greater longevity than Star Signs, and yeah, you can give more energy to your different characters. So I like Iron Tian. You also have Liu Su. Liu Su says if you switch to another character that does not have energy, they will gain 1 energy. This is always good if you are trying to, you know, set up both Chongyun and Beidou at the same time. You can play Liu Su, swap from Chongyun to Beidou. Beidou gets 1 energy, and she will be able to burst sooner than you think. And then finally, we have Kelx's Art, which says you can shift 1 energy from at most 2 of your characters on standby to your active character. So this is always good because essentially if you have Ayaka with 1 energy, if you have Chongyun with 1 energy, if you need to transfer energy over to Beidou in a pinch so that she can deal her elemental burst, or if you need Chongyun to deal very big elemental burst damage in a pinch, you can use this and bring their bursts online. And then the final card here that we have here to get more energy is I Haven't Lost Yet. Essentially, if one of your characters was defeated in this round, you will be able to create 1 Omni Element and create 1 energy. So this is probably quite good for an endgame play because you can sacrifice one of your characters, go over to Chongyun, Chongyun gets 1 energy, Chongyun deals 7 damage, everyone is happy except for your opponent. And yeah, I think that is basically it for the energy package. And finally, we have the other cards that we play in this deck as well. The only 2 miscellaneous cards that I play would be Chang the Ninth. I've already explained in my opening hand chapter on why this is pretty powerful, pretty interesting. Allows you to lean your deck so that, you know, it guarantees that you draw into a Rose Gravestone late game. So this is pretty powerful, don't sleep on it. It is basically a conditional strategize that you can play for free, and I like free things, especially, you know, you will be dealing piercing damage quite consistently as you're playing Superconduct. So yeah, this is probably quite a consistent card in this deck. And the final one is Leave It To Me. I like to play Leave It To Me because I don't really like telegraphing my moves to my opponents too often. Sometimes I like to surprise them by saying, hey, you think I couldn't activate my Ayaka against your character, right? Well, you got it wrong because I have Leave It To Me. So Leave It To Me is a good utility card all around. I know some people don't like to rely on it. I respect that. If you think that there is another card that is better than Leave It To Me in this particular deck, let me know in the comment section below, because, you know, this is just a first build that I've tested a few times against some really good opponents and really good decks, and therefore I thought this is worth doing a video about. But yeah, if you have any comments about what cards I could swap out, how I can make this deck even better, let me know in the comment section below. And yeah, that is all of my card choices in here. So finally, to summarize, what do you want to do with this deck? With this deck, you either want to start with Chongyun or Beidou. You also want to set up their burst as quickly as possible, so that if you're Chongyun, you can take out one of your opponent's characters immediately. Or if you're Beidou, you'll be able to play her elemental burst and swap over to Ayaka to deal a lot of Superconduct damage. So again, start with Beidou or Chongyun, start chipping your opponents down, start to set up for your Superconduct turns. Swap over to Ayaka, deal lots of Superconduct damage and piercing damage, so that your opponents will get down to 6 HP or less. The moment they get down to 6 HP or less, swap back over to Beidou and Chongyun with both Gravestone attached, and then deal very big damage through the use of their normal attacks. So again, start with Beidou or Chongyun first, swap over to Ayaka, deal Superconduct and piercing damage, attach both Gravestone to Beidou or Chongyun, and then go into them for the final knockout. So yeah, this is a pretty fun deck that I've kind of thrown together in the last 24 hours when Beidou was released. I'm quite happy with it, but if you have Any other tips or interesting ways to play Beidou, let me know in the comment section below. And if not, I will see you in the gameplay videos. So into the first game, I'm just going to return to that very first gameplay I've already shown you before when I spoke about that defensive masterclass that my opponent gave me. I just thought it's probably worth going through the entire game and looking at my card choices, looking at me learning about the deck, and just just reviewing how my opponent played their version of their Beidou deck, because there are just so many different Beidou decks out there right now, and I think it's worthwhile just looking at the different trends that other people are exhibiting in their various decks. So here I do start with a few cards that I really like. I start with Iron Tang Tian, and I start with the Parametric Transformer. And as you can probably tell, or you already know from my defensive or turn 1 ideal turn 1 chapter, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to try to keep re-rolling for a Chongyun, and looking at my dice now, I can finally understand why I wanted to swap into Beidou, because there is just no good card for me to play here in order to play Chongyun's skill, and therefore I couldn't set up his burst very quickly. Looking back, should I have swapped over to Beidou? I don't know, maybe I should have just played Chongyun's normal attack twice, but yeah, time will tell if that was swapping over to Beidou was a mistake. So, or rather, maybe playing this Parametric Transform in the first place was a mistake because I didn't know that Beidou's skill does not activate it. But yeah, I guess that's a learning for all of us here. Or maybe just for me, in case you already know that, but I thought those are something that wasn't super obvious, so yeah, probably a good learning for all of us. So my opponent goes for the Beidou skill, and I thought, hey, you know what, I am very smart as well, let me do that as well, because it looks cool. So when I played that, my opponent said, haha, joke's on you, I can also play that again, and then I will absorb your very nice, very tasty 2 damage. So all I do here is to deal electro damage against my opponent. I don't deal any damage, and by the end of round 1, I am left with a Beidou with 2 1 energy plus 1 more from Iron Tang Tian, and no counters on my parametric. So the parametric was a huge mistake in round 1, but you know, we play and we learn, and we play and we learn, so there you go. So next turn, I can tell that I want to go all in on Beidou, so I'm just trying to roll for as many electro dice as possible. Because why do I want to go for Beidou first? Reason is because my Beidou is dying. I cannot afford to lose more damage on Beidou. So since I was going first, I thought, hey, yep, I'm just going to go for the tight collar to prevent any more damage against my Beidou. If my opponent wants to swap over to another character, be my guest, they can do it, and I will deal electro damage against them. I don't mind that. So my opponent plays a couple of Chef Maos just to set up the turn. I think they probably have a 0 cost food in their hands so that they can recur the cost of that Chef Mao and get dice back again. But they do surprise me. They play the Leave It To Me, and that is why I say play or Leave It To Me, is leave it in the deck. Put it in your deck when you build new decks because they are a very good staple. So as what I mentioned earlier, my opponent did have 0 cost food. After playing that, Chef Mao does give them 2 more additional dice, so that was slightly annoying. But anyway, I managed to eat up that damage minus the Superconduct. Or actually, I just eat up 2 of the damage. I still take 1 damage anyway, and my entire team also takes 1 damage. But that is fine, that is fine. I am all set up with my burst now. So I'm just looking for cards to burn here because I really want to play my burst. So I've played it. My opponent is just gonna heal and end the turn, and I am fine with that. And I swap to Chongyun. So the reason why I don't swap to Ayaka in this instance is because Ayaka's ability, right? Her passive only lasts for the turn. So Even if I swap into her now, she will not be able to do cryo damage in the next turn, and therefore I didn't really want to waste her passive that way, and that's why I swapped over to Chongyun. Hopefully to, you know, start to set up Chongyun's burst as well to do big damage. So I tried to re-roll, didn't really get a good roll. I mean, 3 Omni dice and no cryo dice was a little bit sad, but I am very close to activating my parametric transformer, so I wasn't too upset. But yeah, by this point, I was actually thinking that, oh my god, my opponent's playing a very defensive, very foot heavy, very recovery heavy deck. How am I gonna get through this? But you'll be surprised, my friends, you'll be surprised. But let's focus on the round that we have at hand. So my opponent plays food, they play the NRE to get even more food back, and then they play the tight collar, and Beidou now essentially has all of the energy set up.
A touch of frost. Back at ya.
So I play Chongyun's skill so that I can use his normal attack over and over again to trigger both the Chongyun Frost Field, the Chonghua Frost Field, to deal Superconduct attack to my opponent. So this is where I messed up, right? I thought I'll be really smart, play Shattering Ice, plus 2 damage, and play one more Shattering Ice, plus 2 more damage. That should give my Chongyun a total of plus 4 damage, and then if I deal 4 damage with all the different buffs, I should deal 8 damage and therefore knock out their Beidou. But what I found out here is that the Shattering Ice does not actually stack. I was very surprised to learn it doesn't stack, and I definitely messed up here. But yeah, there you go, learn from my mistakes. It doesn't stack, Beidou didn't die, and I'm very sad now. So my opponent is burning all the cards they have because they definitely don't have 4 electric dice, but they want to play anyway because Beidou is just about to die. Chongyun takes 2 damage. I transform my food into cryo dice and I attack and Beidou dies. And I am very happy. So it is good that I still managed to deal that 1 electro damage to Ayaka, because essentially it means that if I deal cryo damage to her, I'll be able to deal piercing damage to her Keqing as well. So I decide to go over to Ayaka because I am aware that if my opponent uses their normal attack or uses their cryo damage, essentially I think my Chongyun dies. So it just feels like there's a very good chance that my Chongyun dies, and therefore I just move over to Ayaka for phase 2 of my game plan, which is to continue to deal Superconduct damage, continue to chip off my opponent's team with Ayaka, so that I can keep Chongyun in the back with his burst, so that he can probably kill off any of my opponent's characters, and also to keep 2 Claymore users in the back so that I can attach Wolf's Gravestone to them. So here I can see that my opponent is just going to be super aggro about things, because they play the Lotus. Even if I attack, it doesn't really benefit me because my opponent doesn't really take damage. And what I see here is that I have the Wolf's Gravestone, unlike the Wolf's Gravestone, and I'm thinking, do I want to burn Dusu so that I can set up Wolf's Gravestone for either Beidou or Chongyun? And what I realized is that I don't actually need to do that because I have my extra 2 Dendro dice to play the Wolf's Gravestone with. But what I am conscious of here is that, you know, I can equip the Wolf's Gravestone to one of my characters, but if I choose the wrong character to attach it to, I would just die, right? So the plan here is to play Liu Su, keep swapping around my characters to soak up damage from Ayaka, so that I can finally set up for, I can identify who the final Claymore character is, and therefore attach Wolf's Gravestone to that character and hopefully go for the kill. So here you can see that Beidou goes down to 2 HP. I use another dice to swap over to Ayaka, allowing my opponent to attack once more. Right, so they do attack there. I attach Rose Gravestone to Chongyun because Beidou is just about to die. So essentially, I was just trying to stabilize and play super defensively. If you notice, I didn't even do any damage on this turn. I just had to ride it out and set up for the late game kill. So here I'm going all in for the electro damage because, or rather the cryo damage, because I know that my Beidou is probably just gonna die. It's just sitting there, not really doing much. So yeah. And I don't actually want to swap into Beidou or Chongyun right now because swapping into them will mean that Ayaka can kill at least two characters. If I swap into Chongyun, she can kill him with her burst and also deal Superconduct, which also kills off my Beidou, so that will be terrible. And I didn't really want to waste any of my characters' dice, or rather I don't want to waste any of my cards by playing the cryo elemental skill damage from Ayaka, so I just went for the normal damage there.
Pardon my discretion. One with my blade.
So this is a risky play from me because Chongyun is at 4 HP, and I don't. And if there was a way for them to increase their attack somehow, I basically die, right? But luckily, the Keqing was only able to deal 3 damage against me, and therefore they decided to just set up for the turn and use the Furfonius Aquila to increase their damage while also using the Electro Resonance to buy more energy. So here I am being super cautious because if they have a Star Signs in their hand, essentially Keqing's burst can come online and it can snipe both my Chongyun and my Beidou off. So before ending my turn, I swap over to Beidou, hoping that they kill off the Beidou, because even if they use the burst, Chongyun will be surviving with 1 HP left. So surprisingly, even though I misplayed very early on in the game, I still managed to beat my opponent. So GG's to my opponent. They do have a super interesting deck. It's a Beidou food deck hybrid kind of thing. But yeah, super interesting. Thank you for the game, and let's go on to the next video. Alright, so next up it is another Beidou deck. It is Klee, Beidou, and Xingqiu, which is pretty interesting because I like looking at, you know, a mixture of elemental reactions that my opponents can play. So this looked like it was going to be a fun matchup, especially with the fact that my opponent was very excited about the new 3.4 characters and decided to use both of them in the same deck. So I am going to go first, and you know, this match didn't take place too long after my previous match. I was inspired by my opponent's really good defensive Beidou display, and I thought, yeah, I'm going first, therefore I want to go with Beidou first, soak some damage, and see if I am able to store time, build the burst, hit the burst, and go for Superconduct piercing damage. So here I am actually thinking, do I want to play Chang? Because, you know, the reality is that I am going to go for Tight Collar, which does not qualify as a normal attack. My opponent is Klee, which means that they don't qualify to play normal attacks because they will not do physical damage, they'll only do power damage. So instead of playing both of them, instead of being greedy, I just decided to play one of them, just in case I need to fix my dice. And my opponent plays one as well, which means that both of us will probably trigger or chunk the knives at the same time. So my opponent plays the Jumpty Dumpty. Luckily I have my shield on, I might only take 1 damage, and I deal 2 more damage back to them. And I think I am quite glad that I left the other Chunk the Ninth in my hand, because I think for this turn, in order for me to set up my burst as soon as possible, what I want to do is to sacrifice the other Chunk the Ninth for an Electro Dice, do a normal attack, and then play Iron Tang Tian to get one more energy into Beidou and set her up. So my opponent decides to swap into Xingqiu, which I respect, because they probably knew that they can deal a lot of damage to me. Even if I were to use the 2 Shu power, I would still take at least 3 damage from Xingqiu's vaporized damage, which is exactly what Xingqiu does now. Xingqiu is going to deal vape damage to me through the use of the Rain Cutter, can't remember. But yeah, this elemental skill. Yeah, Rain Screen, that's the one. Yep. So Beidou is down to 5. That's dangerous territory for me. But all I'm going to do is to play Iron Tang Tian, end the turn, and then if they start the turn with Xingqiu as their main character, or rather active character, it means that I'm also able to deal electro damage to my opponent. So unfortunately didn't roll too well here, but I was gonna go for another roll and do get quite a few on the dice, so it went better than expected. So now it's time for Beidou's Burst and some piercing damage, and it also means that we get to activate Chang the Ninth. Pretty good draws, managed to get Kelsey's Art and managed to get the Karo Dice. So after reviewing my gameplay videos, right, what I realized is that I didn't actually use Kelsey's Art as much as I thought I would. So I don't know if there is a better cut out there. Kelsey's Art might be a potential cut for me, but we'll see. We'll see. So my opponent is going to take a bit of time here. They're probably overloaded with information since they managed to draw 2 cards as well. They do play the second Chunk of Ninth, which is a little bit annoying, but hey, who can blame them? Everyone likes free value. So on my turn, I'm actually thinking if I want to go into Ayaka right now, because if I do that, it means that I will only be able to use her passive for 1 time, and I'm trying to consider if that is worth it. But yeah, I think it is probably worth it. So I just play the Yusu so that I can feed her some energy and start to get her burst online. And it helps that I also have 2 different Karo Dice, so I can trick my opponent into thinking that, hey, I'm not attacking now, haha, you can do what you want to do, but essentially I can still attack.
Present.
So instead of going to Ayaka, I do decide to go into Chongyun instead.
Witness the power of Fuhua.
They use the Rain Cutter, which gives himself Hydro Application. What this means is that I can actually use both of my Karo Dice, get the additional 2 damage, and kill off their Xingqiu. So that is very good, very tasty. I like to see it, and I also get to do piercing damage to my opponent as well.
No.
And there you go. So this is exactly why Iron Tang Tian is so good. With one attack from Chongyun, one switch over to him, and getting another energy from Liu Su, and with Iron Tang Tian at the end of the turn, I managed to charge my Chongyun up entirely, which is super good because it means that I am very close to knocking out their Beidou.
Submit for judgment.
So they say, yeah, come at me, I am going to do my shield thing, but essentially I wasn't really threatened by that. I thought, yep, I still want to go in and with the burst so that I can do 5 good damage to you, because essentially right now I managed to knock out the Beidou anyway, and therefore it enables me to prevent their setup into the Beidou burst. So very happy about that particular exchange there, even if I didn't get the full value of Chongyun's burst. So my opponent attacks me with power damage, they heal for 1, and they hit me for an additional vaporize damage. This is probably me being greedy here, rather than I could have just ended the turn here by eating hash brown and just pass over. But I thought, nope, I like to do damage now to lower my opponent's HP as much as possible, so that even if they do any sort of recovery, right, it is easier for me to attack them as well. So if they do any sort of recovery in the form of wood or in the form of lotus, at least I will still be able to go over the top with Beidou or Ayaka easily. And right now I go into Beidou because I recognize that they haven't attacked with their water swords yet, the rain cutters yet, and therefore I would rather give up Beidou than to allow them to do Hydro Application to my Ayaka, because I do not want them to be able to vaporize my Ayaka too easily. And actually with Ayaka, that's actually my end game, because with my opponent still at 4 HP and with them having the Electro application, all I need to do in this next round is that I would need to apply Ayaka's Elemental skill into my opponent and do 4 damage, which knocks out Klee very nicely. So yeah, that is the final gameplay I was going to show today. Thank you to my opponent for the game. It was really fun and really interesting to see how other people were trying to build Beidou and Klee. If you like this video, like and subscribe. If you think there are other ways to play Beidou, let me know. But yeah, this is my best shot for now. And yeah, see you in the next one. Bye!